Hello everyone, and welcome back. Tonight's video is 6 disturbing true weather station horror stories. Working in a weather station often means isolation, long nights, and monitoring storms from the edge of civilization. But sometimes, the danger doesn't come from the weather. It comes from what you encounter while watching it. These real stories are eerie, unsettling, and deeply disturbing. If you enjoy these horror tales, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? I always love seeing where you're tuning in. Now, let's begin. My name is Marcus, and for a decade, I dedicated my life to the Bureau of Meteorology. My most terrifying posting was at an automatic weather station in the Nullarbor Plain, outback Australia. Imagine a place where the horizon stretches flat for hundreds of miles, where sparse saltbush dot the land, and the silence hums in your ears. Our station was automated, but required regular maintenance checks. This meant flying in a small plane every few weeks, often alone, to replace sensors, calibrate equipment, and ensure solar panels hadn't been smashed. This incident happened during a blazing hot January. The air shimmered above cracked earth. Flies buzzed relentlessly. I had landed my Cessna and was halfway through checks, mindful of venomous snakes, when I noticed something odd near the farthest wind vane. It was a figure. Distorted by heat haze, it seemed unnaturally tall and thin, standing perfectly still. My first thought was a mirage, or maybe a lost local, though that was incredibly rare. I squinted. It wasn't moving. No backpack, no water. Just this impossibly still dark shape against the pale, endless sky. A prickle of unease started. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the vast silence. No response. The figure remained motionless. I walked a little closer. The heat pressed down. That's when I saw it more clearly. It wasn't a person. Too tall, too gaunt. Limbs seemed jointless, like a crudely shaped mannequin, made of something dark, iridescent, shimmering faintly. Its head was small, out of proportion, with no distinct features, just a smooth, dark surface where a face should be. My heart pounded. This wasn't a mirage. This was there. I instinctively reached for my satellite phone, but hesitated. What would I say? There's a stick figure thing in the desert? They'd think the isolation got to me. I backed away slowly, eyes locked on the dark form. It still didn't move, but as I retreated, I felt a distinct shift in the air. The humming silence deepened, grew heavier, as if the air itself held its breath. Then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, like dry leaves scraping or sand skittering across rock, but there wasn't any wind, not a breath. I reached my Cessna, fumbling with keys, my hands shaking. I climbed in, threw my gear, and started the engine. The roar of the propeller was a welcome sound. I looked back at the figure. Still there, motionless. But as I taxied, gaining speed, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. It wasn't standing. It was kneeling, hunkering down, its spindly limbs drawn in close. Even from that distance, through the heat, I had the undeniable, gut-wrenching feeling that it was watching me. Not just observing, but staring, with an intensity that pierced through miles and glass. Its featureless head seemed tilted, tracking my movement. I got that plane off the ground faster than ever. As I circled, gaining altitude, I looked down. The figure was gone, vanished. I spent the next few hours flying back, skin crawling. I told myself it was heat stroke, anything but what I'd seen. but the feeling of being watched, of that silent, dark entity in the middle of nowhere, has never left me. I've never been back. Sometimes, alone in the quiet, I still hear that faint scraping sound. I wonder what it was, patiently waiting in the blistering silence, and what it might have done if I'd stayed longer. That place is supposed to be empty, but I know with chilling certainty that it isn't. Not really. My posting at the Kaskawulsh weather station in the Yukon started with a sense of adventure. The station was a small module bolted to rock, perched on a ridge overlooking a vast, snow-covered valley. Winter was an unyielding siege. Days were short, nights endless, and the wind, my God, the wind. It was a living entity, a constant, howling presence. My partner Dave had gone to Whitehorse for 3 days. I was alone. At first, it was exhilarating. The silence, when the wind occasionally dropped, was immense. Then the biggest blizzard rolled in, a whiteout that lasted for days, burying the station. The radio went dead. I was truly, utterly alone. On the third night of the blizzard, things got weird. I was huddled by the heater when I heard it. A distinct thump on the roof, followed by scraping. I dismissed it. Ice shifting, snow falling. But then it happened again. Closer to the edge of the roof, and this time, the scraping seemed deliberate, rhythmic. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape. My heart picked up pace. A ptarmigan, a lynx, too heavy, too methodical. The sounds moved from the roof to the side of the building, near a reinforced window. I crept over, breath catching. The glass was thick with rime ice, but I pressed my face close. The blizzard was a swirling white vortex, but I could make out a darker shadow that didn't fit the chaos. It was large, hunched, pressed against the exterior wall. The scraping continued, a slow, grinding noise against the metal siding. A shudder ran through me. It wasn't the wind. This felt purposeful. I backed away, grabbing a heavy wrench. A bear. Bears hibernate. And what bear scrapes a building like that? No heavy, trudging in the deep snow. The scraping stopped. A terrifying absolute silence descended, broken only by the shriek of the wind. Then a new sound. A low, guttural gasping against the metal right outside the window. Wet, labored, like something huge struggling to breathe. And then a soft, deliberate tap against the glass. One tap, then another, harder, and another. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an animal. This was something investigating. Something that knew I was inside. I froze, wrench held tight, trying to control my ragged breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs. The tapping paused. Then the scraping resumed lower, at the service hatch to the power conduit. A faint metallic shriek accompanied it, as if something was being pried open. Panic surged. Whatever it was trying to get in. I ran to the control panel, flipping switches. Emergency lights flickered on, casting dancing shadows. As they did, I glanced at the window. For a split second, before rime ice obscured it again, I saw it. A massive dark shape with shoulders too broad and two pale gleaming points that could only have been eyes, staring back from the swirling white. It wasn't hunched. It was bent, as if its limbs weren't meant to hold it upright. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound, retreating to the farthest corner, wrench clutched. I spent the rest of the night curled in a ball, listening to the blizzard, listening for the scraping, the taps, the guttural breaths. I don't know if it left, or if the storm pushed it away, but by dawn, when the blizzard subsided and the radio crackled back to life, the sounds were gone. Dave came back 2 days later. They found no tracks, No signs of anything unusual in the deep snow, just fresh drifts, but I knew what I heard, what I saw. I left that posting shortly after. To this day, when the wind howls, or I hear an unexplained thump, I still feel that cold dread, that utter helplessness. I wonder what pale gleaming eyes watched me from that blizzard, and what would have happened if it had found a way inside. You know, there's a certain beauty in isolation. Or so I thought. My stint at the St. Kilda weather station off Scotland started like a dream. Cliffs plunging into a churning sea, gulls crying, the wind a constant companion. I was a young meteorologist, and the idea of being the sole human sentinel against the Atlantic was romantic. My days were instrument checks, data logging, and watching the sun dip below the endless horizon. The station was a sturdy concrete building designed for brutal gales. My only company, old books, a shortwave radio, and the ocean's roar. Most nights, after readings, I'd turn on the radio, hoping for a stray broadcast. But sometimes, when the St. Kilda fog rolled in, a thick, impenetrable blanket that could descend in minutes, the radio acted strangely. It wasn't static. It was a hum, a deep resonant vibration permeating the signal, sometimes distorting whatever I found. I attributed it to atmospheric interference. Logical, but the hum had an organic rhythm, subtly shifting, rising and falling, like a monstrous, slow breath. And it only happened when the fog was densest, when visibility outside dropped to a few feet. One particular night, the fog was worse than ever. It felt like the island was suspended in milky white cotton. The air outside was absolutely still, a rare occurrence, making the fog heavier, muffling the waves to a soft sigh. I was in the main room trying to get the shortwave to cooperate when the hum started. Stronger than ever, almost pushing through the speakers, a palpable vibration. Then, through the hum, something else, a low, sustained groan, not human, not animal, deep, reverberating, like a colossal bell tolling underwater, but with a living, aching quality. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, amplified by the oppressive fog. My skin prickled. I turned the radio off, but the sound didn't vanish. It was outside. It was there. I snatched up my heavy-duty flashlight, heart thudding. Common sense screamed to stay inside, but terror pulled me towards the reinforced door. I peered through the porthole. A wall of white. The groan pulsed, growing louder, closer. Definitely from the sea, but so close it felt like it was at the base of the cliffs just below. Then a different sound. A wet, dragging scrape. Like something impossibly heavy pulled across rocks directly beneath me. Scrub, slurp, scrub, slurp. Each sound punctuated by that deep, resonant groan. Not waves, too regular, too intentional, and then a sensation. The entire station, concrete and steel, vibrated beneath my feet, a low, continuous tremor intensifying with each scrape. I backed away terrified, eyes darting. My scientific mind scrambled for an explanation. Geological activity. But my gut screamed otherwise. This wasn't an earthquake. This felt alive. The vibrations continued, growing stronger. I imagined something colossal, unseen, moving right underneath us, climbing from the depths. Legends of creatures from the abyss. What if the isolation, the fog, allowed such things to surface? Then the tremors stopped. The scraping ceased. The groaning faded. The silence that followed was absolute. Heavier than the fog itself, I stood frozen, clutching my flashlight. Nothing. just the muffled sigh of the distant sea. I spent the rest of that night wide awake, staring at the door. It didn't return. When the sun burned through the fog, the next morning, there was no trace. No strange marks on the rocks. Just the wind and waves. I finished my posting, but the romance was gone. Now, when a thick fog rolls in, or I hear an unfamiliar hum or groan near the ocean, I remember that night. And I wonder, with chilling certainty, what truly ancient, colossal things still lurk in the dark, silent places of our world, waiting for the cover of a dense fog to make their presence known before slipping back into the deep. And I wonder if anyone else has heard them. As a meteorologist, you learn to love patterns. It's how we predict the future. But what if the pattern isn't in the clouds, but in something else entirely? Something that shouldn't be there, tucked away in the deepest silence. My name is Elena, and my 2 years at the Mount Celeste weather station in Alaska shattered my scientific certainty. The station was a modern structure, perched on a barren, windswept peak. The nearest town was a 3-hour drive. Most of the time, it was just me, the sensors, and an overwhelming pristine silence that felt like it was pressing in. The air was thin, nights filled with stars, days a blur of data. It was isolating, but peaceful. At first, the first hint that something was amiss was subtle. On clear, windless nights, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., I'd hear a faint clink, like small stones gently tapped, or hollow metallic sound. So soft, so intermittent, that for weeks I dismissed it as imagination, house settling, or a nocturnal animal. Bears were rare, but possible. But the sound persisted, and it had a rhythm, not random. A slow, deliberate tap, 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 tap. It never lasted long, then vanished. I checked everything, sensors, antenna, solar panels. Nothing was loose. I even set up a low-light camera. It recorded nothing but dark. The unease crept in. The sound always came from the same direction. A rocky outcrop about 300 yards from the station. A jagged cluster of ancient granite. One clear night, the clinking started again. Louder, amplified by the stillness. I peered out with binoculars. The outcrop was a dark mass against the stars. Nothing, but the sound came from there. And my internal monitoring system showed faint, localized energy spikes, correlating exactly with the sound. My scientific mind screamed for answers, but my gut twisted. This wasn't an animal. This felt purposeful. The clinking patterns shifted. Sometimes a simple counting, sometimes a strange, primitive melody. It was haunting. It was like someone out there, tapping out a message. One evening, the air was unusually still and warm. Not a breath of wind. I was outside doing a routine check when I heard it. The clinking. It was daylight just before sunset. I froze, wrench in hand. Clear as a bell, coming from the outcrop, closer than ever. A steady, deliberate clink, clink, clink. I couldn't resist. With adrenaline surging, I walked towards the outcrop, slowly, cautiously, my heart thumping. The sounds grew louder from directly behind a massive flat-faced boulder. As I got within 50 yards, the sound stopped. Abruptly. The silence that descended was absolute, deeper, and more menacing. I stood paralyzed, eyes scanning every crevice. Nothing. Then as I turned back, I caught it. A brief, almost imperceptible flash of something. Not reflective like glass, more like dull, polished obsidian. It dipped just behind the boulder. And then, I saw the marks, fresh, shallow indentations in the rock face, circular, thumbnail-sized. Not carvings, not erosion. They looked like something had been tapping them, systematically, and they formed a distinct, unsettling sequence. Then a faint thrumming, a low, deep vibration from within the earth beneath the boulder. Not natural. It resonated in my chest, a feeling of cold radiating from the ground. The air around the outcrop grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Suddenly, from just behind the boulder, the clinking started again. Frenzied, rapid, almost frantic. And then, a shadow. Not a sun-cast shadow, but something that seemed to detach from the very rock, tall, impossibly thin, moving with unnatural fluidity. My blood ran cold. No mistaking it. It wasn't natural. It was aware of me. It was reacting. I didn't hesitate. I ran, faster than ever, scrambling back to the station, lungs burning, the frantic clinking echoing as if chasing me. I slammed and locked the heavy door, throwing every bolt, trembling uncontrollably. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner, listening to the agitated clinking, which eventually faded as the sun rose. The next morning, the energy spikes were gone. The sounds were gone. The marks on the boulder were still there, but faded. I left permanently, 2 days later, citing personal reasons. I never told anyone the full story. To this day, the methodical clink, clink, clink haunts my quiet moments. I used to find peace in silence, but now it just reminds me of what can emerge from the earth, something that follows its own incomprehensible patterns, and was patient enough to wait for me to listen. They say the desert whispers secrets to those who listen, but at the Malula weather station in Syria, the whispers weren't from the sand. They were different. I was stationed there for a year, during a period of relative calm. The station was ancient, a stone observatory built into a cliff, later expanded. The isolation was profound. Only rock and sand and searing heat by day, chilling cold by night. My routine was simple. Check instruments, log data, maintain the solar array. Nights were the hardest, especially when the moon was new. That's when it started. A faint, high-pitched whining sound. Not the wind, as it happened on perfectly still nights. Not mechanical. I checked every piece of equipment. It seemed to come from the ancient stone walls themselves. A thin, almost electrical hum, just on the edge of hearing. At first, I thought it was tinnitus, a side effect of extreme quiet. But it was too consistent, too specific. It was often accompanied by immense pressure, like the air thickening, making it hard to breathe. The temperature inside the stone structure would fluctuate inexplicably, dropping several degrees in minutes, then slowly rising. One night, the whining was unbearable. It felt like it was drilling into my skull. I was at the main console, but my concentration was shattered. The lights in the small living area began to flicker, dimming and brightening unevenly. Then, from the corners of my vision, I started seeing things. Not clear shapes, but distortions, shimmering heat haze effects that shouldn't be indoors. They moved, just beyond my direct gaze, like wisps of smoke, coiling and uncoiling. My heart hammered. This wasn't just isolation playing tricks. This was something else. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the corners, but the second the beam hit, the distortions would vanish. But the feeling of being watched, of something pressing in, was overwhelming. The air grew colder, and a faint, acrid smell, like ozone mixed with something rotten, permeated the room. Then, from deep within the walls, where ancient stone met modern additions, I heard a clattering. Not a single fall, but a cascade, like hundreds of small, brittle objects tumbling down a narrow shaft. It was loud, unnervingly close. As it faded, the whining stopped. The light stabilized. The pressure eased. I spent the next hour with my back to the wall, holding a heavy iron bar, listening to the absolute terrifying silence. When morning came, I searched the entire station. Nothing disturbed, no cracks, no fallen stones, no explanation for the clattering. Yet the smell of ozone lingered. I left that station shortly after, citing stress-related fatigue. Unofficially, I couldn't stand another night with that high-pitched whine, that chilling pressure, and those unseen distortions. I still don't know what caused it. Was it some strange electromagnetic phenomenon? Or something that had been trapped within those ancient stones for centuries, occasionally waking on a still desert night, reminding any lonely soul within its walls that they were never truly alone. The desert doesn't just hold secrets in its sands. Sometimes it holds them in its silence and its very rock. Working at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault weather station wasn't what most people imagine. We were a small team, but the isolation was immense. Miles from Longyearbyen, deep in the Arctic permafrost, our job was to monitor the climate conditions around the vault, vital for the future of humanity's food supply. The station was modern, sterile, but the environment itself felt ancient, indifferent. My colleague Lars and I rotated shifts, mostly alone for weeks at a time. It was during my night shifts that I started hearing it. A sound on the emergency frequency. A channel meant for critical alerts only. Not static, not a distress call. Just a child's laughter, faint, high-pitched, undeniably human, but distorted, as if coming through several layers of ice and time itself. It would pop up randomly, last a few haunting seconds, then vanish. I asked Lars about it. He just grunted, "Arctic radio ghosts, kid. Ignores them." He said it like a joke, but his eyes were too serious. I tried, but the laughter became more frequent and more unsettling. It sounded joyful, yes, but also incredibly sad, distant, like an echo of something long lost, trapped. Then one night, the laughter changed. It wasn't just random bursts anymore. It became a pattern, a short melodic phrase, repeated 3 times, followed by a brief, agonizing sob that tore at my heart. And it sounded like it was getting closer, clearer, almost as if it was calling out directly to me. I was alone in the station, checking the external sensors on a rare clear night. The stars were brilliant, painting the black sky, but the silence felt predatory, waiting. My radio crackled with static, then the sound. Not the laughter this time. A child's voice, distinct and chilling, whispering, "Hello?" Just one word. My blood ran cold, freezing in my veins. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, but there was nothing in the stark, frozen landscape. The voice was so clear, so close, it felt like it was right next to me, breathing the same frigid air. I dropped my equipment and ran inside, slamming the heavy door shut, throwing every bolt. Lars returned the next morning, his gruff demeanor unchanged, but I couldn't explain it without sounding completely insane. He just shook his head again. "Told you, kid. Arctic ghosts. Best not to listen too close." I left Svalbard as soon as my rotation ended, unable to endure another moment there. The laughter, the whisper. It wasn't just radio interference. It was a plea or a lure from something ancient and cold, something trapped beneath the ice, trying to find its way out. I still hear that whisper sometimes. especially when the wind howls outside my window. And I wonder what it wanted, and if it's still waiting for someone, anyone, to listen long enough to let it in. These stories, pulled from the edges of human experience, paint a chilling picture, don't they? They remind us that for all our technology, all our scientific understanding, there are still vast, untouched, and unknowable forces at play in our world. From the silent, observing entity in the scorching nullarbor to the spectral, tapping presence in the Alaskan wilderness. From the colossal, deep-sea tremor near St. Kilda to the child's desperate whispers in the Arctic. These aren't just isolated incidents. They are echoes, warnings from the forgotten corners of our planet, etched into the very fabric of these remote places. What is it about extreme isolation that seems to thin the veil? Does the sheer remoteness, the profound lack of human noise, allow other frequencies to resonate? Do the ancient landscapes themselves hold memories, presences that stir when we intrude, especially in places where the weather itself is a force of primordial power? Perhaps the relentless wind, the blinding snow, the suffocating heat, or the profound stillness isn't just a natural phenomenon. Perhaps it's a cover, a medium through which something else moves, something that thrives in the absence of easy explanation and preys on the vulnerable, isolated human mind. It's easy to dismiss these accounts as the ravings of lonely people, as hallucinations brought on by stress and solitude. And sometimes, perhaps that's true. But what if it isn't? What if these individuals, brave enough to venture into the planet's most unforgiving environments, stumbled upon a reality we prefer to ignore? A reality where the silence isn't truly empty, where the shadows move with purpose, and where the line between natural phenomena and something far more sinister is blurred beyond recognition. These stories aren't just about what they saw or heard. They're about the lasting impact, the questions that claw at the back of their minds long after they've returned to civilization, the unsettling feeling that there's always something more out there, waiting for the right conditions, waiting for the right moment, and perhaps waiting for someone to be alone enough, isolated enough to finally make contact. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt that profound sense of isolation, that unnerving feeling of being watched when no one was around? Have you ever heard something unexplainable, felt a presence where none should be, especially in remote or wild places? Or perhaps you know of similar tales from other weather stations or other outposts on the fringes of human habitation. Share your own experiences, your theories, or your chilling stories in the comments below. Let's talk about the things that lurk where our maps end and the unknown begins. If these stories sent a shiver down your spine, please hit that like button, subscribe for more tales from the dark corners of our world, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the truly terrifying. And remember, the next time you check the weather report, consider the brave souls who bring you that data, and wonder, just for a moment, what they might have encountered when the storm rolled in, and they were the only ones left to witness it. Stay safe out there, and try not to listen too closely to the whispers on the wind.